Okay, I'm good.
So is everyone good?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Planning the United States voting commercial advantage towards populism. American populism is on the rise. COVID and economic stagnation. There are already 8 6 political opposition minorities in the media. The pandemic is radically altered the democratic society. So much populism from populism. How much populism for new research reforming fake scientists, populist opposition to lots of making imagine about unemployment and economic strength. We feel possible to mobilize against the feeding with the start mobilizing the otherwise populism can have a bright future, and defeat of U.S. populism spills over and have an international impact. Watchmen 629, the chain of impossible links between the world politics to be have global implications. I've started inspiration for national politics, including most of the government, hungry, political, radical, right, and French, innovation. Now the way to send the very feedback with the process of culture war. The People's Campaign at first, people populism, the House not just pure populism, but there's no guarantee that populism will go quietly in. Populist leaders kill global climate action, denialism, oversimplification, and cooperation fails. 2-12 determine the part of the President Whit 7 denying countries that were global mission for countries with public leadership, global cooperation, set up change action to be effective. Public forces trying to speak of multilateral organizations, groups that are focused on climate change, taking action will be called public and powers for economic cultures, necessary action, avoiding cost extinction, any reduction to prioritize over any other impact. L17 politicians opportunities to the next support the with several warnings and activities that the hits with the commissions. Let me with a couple from economic growth, economy, and running more from negotiating down to current will to practically the intention warming 50 probability of the probability for 40% across multiple tipping points while fighting 1690, 46% more than 7 billion daily heat of 44 disease that there's so many time to revert, class of change the policy has been fitness in the next 5 years for subject of warning devastation felt disproportionately in the forest, 3 billion shot 1.2 degrees C climates of the essence, which across the 30 decibel cherry tipping points of along and change of the kind of a call quality like the ducks climbing or to see a thumbing curve propagation causes of everything feedback wheel and it will make people put force multiplier and only compulsory voting saw the counterbalance is populist turnout. Malcolm Hoku's 6-8 of mobilizing voters. Populist mobilization disaffected populist states to the same populist parties bring voters to the polls. The solution is universal voter mobilization, closely running peace, populist mobilization, populist inclusive forward participation, closely brings in all events that they elect to include these parts that capture by policies, populist mobilization as well as habitual voters mobilizing voters make counterbalance to the mobilization of the parts of the population system where overregistered voters cast a ballot after elimination of our populist parties supposed to disappear. Innovators choose democracy, voter turnout, what makes elected rose in 2020, coronavirus voter suppression, and declining trust in electoral legitimacy. Dover 523 of Americans don't have a complex election or hoping never hits first time voters are political engagement to institutional styles and integrity of democracy on top of Russian interference, fraud, voter suppression. There are new worries because of coronavirus, long lines, undecisively closed voting locations, absentee balance, fake collapse of voting infrastructure that have 30% everyone hates today's results of your faith in system. Whole many Americans will and we're hoping officials are trying to shape who gets to vote and how pockets of margin shifting votes will probably giving people false impressions they're suddenly being to change the result of these to make people the vote. The more people will vote, the more results affect the vote of the people and voter turnout will trigger a legitimacy crisis and dissolution of the U.S. government. Gardner 626 supposed to pandemic disabilities full of the responsibility to repeat the elections is highly complex to the solution. The government trying a full phone crisis of Virginia will see the rest of the electoral resiliency even in the higher it's getting harder to address. It's not just because there's no way to determine who intended to vote. Only when they can agree on the election. If elections occur multiple states, so additionally, after the infernal states been by Speak Gore, leaving the most to the election administration could be subject to intense constitutional scrutiny. Incumbent has works out of the apparent to trust the political process, like electoral process, the turn to football. Regime listening in person voting for absentee voters also fraudulently going low within the Republican Party. Just a running along the separation from the England and the retention of power risk of posed at the electoral election democracy. Our high account is low and failing democracy ensures China rise. 2020 is crucial. 17 China's equal conservation are said colors they moment again go infiltrate Washington. The U.S. Democrats is facing registered tests without any certainty, but the economic situation running the master of the election, the U.S. was not one global role in the electorate with the values of institution terms were tired Chinese leaders telling global partners the U.S. is declining later, the faltering modern China remains seizing opportunities for opportunities at the vacuum Beijing. It is only Russian disguise is getting into digital currency. Beijing is position Chinese national ahead of a range of UN China continue to expand military capacity studies, ready for more aggressive military action in Taiwan is growing frequent. It would be more because the Washington turning aspirations in China China rise causes nuclear war. The U.S. will not accept sharing power. Late 17, the China can become a regional hegemon. The U.S. not tolerate your competitors in cluster interest. There will be a peaceful emerging China economic co-opportunity in China so they can distribute your getting economic coalition of security competition in the EC. Where we can offset that war with the SES still in the EC. As now in the way the war between the U.S. and China nuclear weapons would be used. The U.S. does not accept sharing power and we could win Norman's links for China from becoming a competitor. Pierre Paris considering Dutch Trump is on the back of dealing with allies, meaning American leadership, but the recent American judge that can hate Trump actually allies with the China and U.S. primacy prevents global great power conflict, multipolar revisions, and fragments the global order and causes nuclear war. Rains and Edel 19 great competition, security limits, and terror conflicts, and republics control for China. Wants settlement use in order for make it so that rebels pursue influence great power, right with great power, war raging around for significant for both conflicts and Russian doctrines, want that these unique love in the world return to great power, struggling with science, Russians don't want to use original powers, but to be an actual regional impact wise from Moscow, applying to the Middle East, China's mission to multiple Chinese building versus applying even further, Zhang expected power of the Arctic and the space in India and Africa. She told the CCP that Beijing can take safe acted on alternative US leadership. Originally, in the beginning, you was able to have been guaranteed political prevention of prestige international conflict and war America should both its defenders and only compulsory voting cells and massively increases turnout and restores democratic legitimacy. Mayo 19 and 20 turnout use of the most election highest 100 years. The people 50% believe the democracy there might be 50% voters up to date all these. It's in their models of the right to participation. Americans be embarrassed of all voter turnout of international strike vote. Turn encourage politicians to design policy that cater to the interests of youth. This is important societal division. The ECU democracy the US for democracy be centered voter engagement. This is the FD with the politicalism at risk and the interest of the decisions of right to the opposition of the mandatory voting the bigger the vote for the stronger. The context we citizens the leave is used in meant to the better turn around low. It can be spent on people to make up the electorate and framing. First, pleasure and pain of the students maximally accessible being. First, pleasure and pain are to be valuable. People consistently regard pleasure for pain and strictly ask for the pleasure to be seen to be instrumented by anything. 1 to 16. Pleasure to be valued, pain to be something kind of pleasure to about pain, pleasure to pleasure pain, manifest experiences that every reaching pleasure not good for anything further pleasure pain both reach a matter of value. So I didn't read anything after the first note card.
All right, cool. The first advantage, you talk about American populism. Why does COVID impact that?
Sure. COVID caused an economic crisis, which is a good place for populists to employ their rhetoric of the us versus them. They're blaming the elite for COVID and also reject science and think that like the scientific response to COVID-19 is like elitism, as kind of like pictured by like Trump supporters, like rallies against like wearing face masks, etc. And also it caused an economic crisis, which allows people to kind of build resentment towards people in power, and which is more empowered by populist rhetoric.
Okay. The evidence about sort of renewables. Why is populism specifically key to prevent warming?
Sure. Populist leaders are generally more likely to be climate deniers, kind of what I explained earlier about like their denial of science generally. Also, they right-wing populist parties make up 30% of global emissions. So if they are not included in these discussions, that would be extremely bad and makes it extremely hard to lower CO2 emissions. They also oversimplify they also oversimplify warming since of the rejection of science. They see it as kind of like an elitist hoax. And our evidence indicates that Trump is kind of like the center of this. He has arguably like the most power out of all populist leaders, and his active climate denialism kind of just fuels this. If
Trump sort of fuels all of this, does that mean you also have to win that Trump like wins the next election?
I don't know. Like, I think it just depends. But Trump is just an example of a populist. Like, he is not like all of populism. He's just an example.
I mean, it sort of talks about like COVID, econ decline. Your examples of populist leaders are all Trump. Like, where do you talk about anything else?
Sure. Our claims about populism being on the rise all take into consideration factors like what I explained before about like the rhetoric they employ. They're like kind of like distaste for like the elite, which is not just Trump. He is more like a symptom of like a populist resurgence than the cause.
Okay, so actually, yeah, that's fine. The democracy advantage. Why does things like vote by mail not mean that voter turnout increases this year?
Sure. I think our evidence cites a couple different reasons why turnout could be low, including like voter suppression and declining trust in the election.
Okay, this seems to be a year where like people predominantly think that think that it's important, where either it's like Trump's base or like people who think that Trump's really bad. Why do these things sort of outweigh that?
Sure. I think there's also like some Americans who kind of don't fall in those categories. People who maybe wanted to vote for like Bernie would be less motivated to vote. People who consider themselves like more moderate Republicans who don't agree with Trump and don't agree with Biden. I think there's a lot of people who fall in between the cracks and aren't like super motivated.
Okay, that's fine. Let's have everyone see. The order is 4 off, populism, and then democracy advantage.
Sorry, can you just repeat?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, no problem. 4 off, the framing page, populism, then democracy.
Give me one sec to just open this file. My word's being quite slow.
I have not gotten the doc yet.
All right. Yeah.
What email did you send it to, just so I can make sure I'm refreshing the right one?
I just replied to the chain.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, makes sense. Yep. Yeah. Mine's just opening. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the wrong doc.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the RFD hasn't happened yet.
Oh, shoot. No, okay. My bad. I sent between our document. Okay, yeah, that one.
Okay, I'm ready when you are.
I need one sec. I'm ready.
Interprofitable aspect may not specify democracy. A is an indefinite article that modifies democracy in the resolution means you have to prove the resolution true in a vacuum, not in a particular instance. CCC. The articles A are an internal use to reverse a less prescribed manner. B will make great honey dot indefinite parameters all members of that class violation. They specify the United States limit specifying a democracy offers a huge explosion of the topics to get permutation. Expose the neck by burden draws irresistible lines of debate where the F is always ahead. Lerman 20. What is left of the 37 liberal and 50 electoral democracies ground? We always end up reading bad generics that have minimal links. They'll plan their well pressed small extinction theory just wins every time. TVA solves for the half as an advantage. Voters' fairness, the basic aim, so any unfair advantage is losing controls. The internal link to education is the reason school funds debate carries on to the world. Reject 1AR theory. 8 point is the 2AR must overcover substance, overcover theory. Since they get the collapse in 2AR, their response to my counter triple B new. The 1AR theory necessitates intervention, so drop the argument best if we win defense on the show. Also justifies reasonability since judgment intervention is inevitable, so they get new 2ARs. Allows them to upgrading the 1AR. Excuse my strat and desensitizes class for tricks. It also has conditional value, which supposed to 2NR and forces me to multiple 2AR collapses. Drop the debater to deter future abuse and first skewing the neck. Pride abuse competing interests is key to setting norms and reasonability. Invites arbitrary judgment intervention. No RBIs after action wouldn't be for being topical. They have to burn for doing so. The next off, Biden will win now despite the current middle crisis. Joseph 731 tax on election day until chaos. Biden usually oppose market even small shift towards Trump because the election must close, leading to drawn out core battles over middle politics. Close race that need recanvassing, but substantially more of Biden's supporters will be voting by mail. Joseph 731 times out. Twice likely, but mail is a huge win for mass elections. Have thoughts before 2% of the state laws cast by mail. Biden wins by mail. Trump wins the other ballots. Typically, Canada win by 8%, but fools were invalid. Trump won. The plan backlogs the system, which causes a contested Trump victory. Joseph 731 logistical problems are another big avenue used to large mail votes. Resisting ballots officials do not have the resources they need. Funding infrastructure are not there. Trump tactics because they expand mail voting. Handed to Trump's victory. Don't be able to ballots for practice on election day. Actions will be delayed. Corporate applied to Congress to determine the election. Most may not accept the results. Trump 2020 caused extinction. Star 19 climate change. Global warming. Supreme Court delusion. Put off commitments. Decarbonization. Community electricity. Nothing here. Opposed to the win was when you will determine arms with heightened risk of nuclear war. Attacks on the ISIS. Strongest for arms control. Treating the world more changes. Several countries may offer nuclear weapons. Washington, Moscow. We lose right. Inspect each other's arsenal. Greater uncertainty about each other's capabilities and intentions. Next off, CP text the United States federal government should establish a substantial incentive program for artificial tree carbon capture. The United States federal government should propose adoption of artificial tree capture technology internationally. The U.S. creating super trees is sufficient to solve international warming. Super trees are distinct and better than any other geoengineering method. Vince 12 would be one of the few days of geoengineering that pioneers multiple energies will stop willing for artificial enough carbon dioxide. Temperatures will be 3 C or more. Propets of carbon dioxide. Like artificial tree that personally source of carbon dioxide 10,000 more efficient than other tree leaves. Only virtual coastal space and over life choices of carbon. One more ton of carbon dioxide. 10 million roots. 10% of global annual carbon dioxide emission. Total emissions we get 100 million trees is global waste. So carbon dioxide produced in a million completely removed. And Oman, the next off compulsory voting understands recognition is the endpoint of policy which participates in a cellular roof of consent that coerces participation for indigenous dispossessed population, but assuming that people consent to be governed. Simpson 17 analysis starts with things formally political, especially court makers, contamination, acute temporarily second world because the territories that can implement the power to the triumph of these kind of peace and electoral laws and the body of set of colonial states and architecture, history, policies, and the allow for reduction to answer the profound system of justice, justice, advantage, recognition, peace, philosophical institution, matters of historical justice, citizen violence, inequality, and power abuse on the ocean will communicate through same suspended the deeper issues obfuscated by apparent agreed upon nature voting against insect complex policy of the rendered as reduced forms that imagine fiat pollution, colonial context, enforcing indigenous especially and granting freedoms and illegal tricks and consent to this rules and set marks and here possibility that freedom after this possession recognition should outweigh the case to reproduce the settled colonialism, denial of indigenous sovereignty, violence and crimes. NC-17, the United States 16 will never let American excuse because he refused to recognize U.S. sovereignty policy recognition that represents the U.S. citizens form of practice recognition underpin which ways and alternatives of national government recognition emerges and counters with the difference every understood confers that African the moral gateway and the publication for political oppressive concealed the most cultural development recognition function as mechanism for manipulation colonial tax for means to do effects are reproduced vote negative for anarcho indigenism is a practice of that elaborates resistance text to the stage for anarcho indigenism falls on social I don't know more produce direct action against colonial coercion any permutation would be incoherent because it forced indigenous anarchists to articulate their demands in terms of dissent instead of resurgence Roman Alcala 20 the indigenous forms of the dissent because resurgence ultimately results in restoration balance law resolution and indigenous communities are structuring capitalism and ritual activities and global gender systems so the Canadian channel the very foundation of the nation state the creation self-determining original nation space and return non coercive situations relates to organizing society power indigenous policies and moving beyond the resistance and contract national authority no coercive enforcement distributional hierarchy willing to form position plus me turn and there's something local roots and land of the open will struggle for justice freedom the political philosophy movement is something with anti-social racial democratic is taking action for China Christian wrestling the sign or state forms I don't know more music civil policy that bring more move beyond recognition that action that's included the state and he calls any form of president state-based culture and community press knowledge of the interest responsibilities lower forms of self-distribution and see a couple of form of environment forms of resource distribution the case page first is framing there's no reason why extinction comes here probability over high magnitude impacts anything else causes policy paralysis because there's always a small chance of extinction impacts and two is subverts actual suffering happening now in exchange for those deemed important by the West. You shouldn't let them make new 2NR on the 2NR things on this because they didn't in the 1 and C. The no 1AR answers. It wasn't in the 1A the populism advantage. People pick Biden over Bernie for 2020. It proves that we're become more moderate. The internal link is terrible. It says COVID may be away from populism to rise, but the next chart assumes complete defeat, no solvency after COVID is gone. So then so is populism because they say the only COVID causes economic decline. They don't solve the root cause of post-recovery. It'll just rise again. Trump loses for the only model that's been correct every year since 1984. Trump losing takes out all of their impact. Gordon 20 correctly predicted winners since 1985. Lutheran will lose. Performance potential use of discipline evaluation finding the sticking your head in the enemy model account for COVID-19 robust is the last of the economic change compulsory voting least right-wing politicians getting power Brennan 14 compulsory voting helps our with national parties everyone you can Democrats we change with them cut the card that want renewables transition won't happen the best scenario is centuries mill 15 anticipate at least another century more oil and gas with 15% electricity wins so lower power than 9 cents returns and water man will be among the most obvious limits fossil fuels still dominate goals energy by 2015 no extinction it takes 12 degrees without adaptation Farquhar 17 and very long levels of warming so see run most will humanity will definitely extinction is probably eventual warning is around 10% of the world will take democracy next advantage royal evidence is terrible compulsory voting doesn't do anything for democracy just as it would increase turnout no warrant for it turnout is key to stop China rise and war should have happened in March COVID has been a problem since a long time ago people hate Trump or love him that increases turnout and outweighs COVID per cross they literally admitted that it's only a small amount of the population compulsory voting builds resentment not democracy to seal 320 ban voting the lower connection build resentment not building the surveys if you see the not going to prevent Jones on battle and see the way Republicans spell on presidential 2020 election will the effective route of machine government is all about working with do things for politicians how China's defensive cooperation and complies with global norms jail 19 crimes of less reduction to the government is reason domestic realism Chinese China rhetoric Chinese friendly relations with issues with Pakistan Vietnam Chinese engaging in international community sought to the world taking part in non-political treaty as well as biological and chemical willing to work in Western dominated system pursue compliance with norms and indicated what their country's status trans compliance with sovereignty trade arms control human rights versus absolute of our sovereignty skip the next card withdrawing troops is good at president basing strategy to generate counterbalances cause proliferation and revisionism glacier 17 troops station above the vulnerable attack in home conditions making targets use the terrorist attacks militaries to increase anti-American neighborhood and even probably making US bases targets that basically moderate attacks on US locals and satellite bases and will oversee these instrumental attack areas based on the action because it generates counteraction steering adversary into submission. Got the card at submission.
Sorry, where did you cut the card?
Submission.
Okay. Cross?
Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, the other card was cut at want, right?
Yes.
Cool.
What's the status of the counterplan and the critique?
Conditional.
Okay, what parts of the critique of the after the critique do you disagree with?
Sort of like all of it.
Do you like disagree with the fact that like Trump is president now?
All the offensive parts of the critique.
Okay, can you can the app happen in the world of the alt?
No, it's not a floating thing.
Okay, can you walk me through the links?
Yeah, so the first link sort of is the idea that it's their Snipson card. It talks about how your app understands recognition or them voting as the endpoint of politics, and that like them participating is enough for them to make a difference. We say that's bad because it coerces participation and says that, oh, you have to vote or else you're not, or it sort of blames them for not voting, or that it sort of forces them to vote as like a means of consenting to be governed. The second one talks about how sort of it forces them to recognize the government and or prevents protests against like voting as like means of sovereignty.
Okay. What ground did you lose on the T-shell?
Yeah. So there's a few things. So by like sort of any general disads or like counter plans.
Like what dissad you lost?
Like, for example, if we read like a voter suppression dissad or like a
Why can't you read a voter suppression dissad?
Yeah, sort of our idea is that it's not only that we lose the dissads, like obviously we can still probably read some dissads that minimally link. Our main argument for the ground standard is that instead your small app will just be our like minimal link. So even if we can read the dissads, that literally does not matter because your small extinction app will always just beat that because it's more well prepped and the link is not specific from our dissads.
Okay. Why are Democrats more likely than Republicans to vote by mail?
It's sort of just like, yeah. So it sort of talks about how more of the Democrats, actually, it just makes a claim. It's a study about like, and polls about like how people vote.
Why is like mail-in voting has like always existed? Why is like now do we backlog the system?
Obviously, because of compulsory voting, you like flow in like millions and millions of votes.
Okay. So like, but like, what? Okay. So like, how do like increases in ballots like cause backlog and then a Trump victory?
Yeah. So the argument is sort of the mail crisis is already happening, but it's not bad enough to the point where our impact happens. COVID-19 means that more Biden supporters voted by mail, but if we implement compulsory voting, that means literally everyone has to vote. Assuming that Democrats are twice as likely to vote by mail, that means our study indicates that that would put Biden within 8%. Like if just 8% of the vote by mails, like if the mail votes were taken out, then that means Trump would win. If you backlog the system, that allows Trump to sort of mess with the vote, mess with like the vote by mail, allows him to take away that 8%.
I'll take prep. I used a minute 30.
Is it sent?
No, I'll send it now. Let me know when you're ready for an order.
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I'm good.
It'll be case in the order of the democracy advantage, then populism, and then framing. And then it'll be. Let me just make sure I get this right. It'll be T, the critique, the counterplan, the decide.
Wait.
Wait, democracy first, right?
What?
Democracy first.
Yes.
Cool. Let me open the doc.
Okay, yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I should be good.
Okay. So
Wait, can you repeat the order for me again?
Yes.
Sorry.
It's the app in the order of the democracy advantage, the populism advantage, the framing page, T, the critique, the counterplan, the decide.
Okay.
Is everyone ready?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Low voter turnout in 2020 means the election will be illegitimate. That causes electoral regime illegitimacy that restrictions the effectiveness of the U.S. government, which forms power vacuums that China will fill. That escalates U.S. and China's will use nuclear weapons. And the line by line, no impact on Marshall evidence or Gardner evidence is succeeding to go. The 2020 election is key. And resign doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who wins the election or evidence just, or it doesn't matter who wins the election that people go in. Our moral evidence is really good on this question. It says that the most disaffected and disenfranchised groups will vote. And it doesn't matter. China is not defensive. Their head impact card is really good on this question. Talks about how China is deploying into regions like the Middle East now, which proves that they want to be an extra regional impact and not just as on the defensive. And we don't get rid of troops. It doesn't trigger their impact. It's about democratic legitimacy and China using rhetoric to make the U.S. appear weaker. And on the populist advantage, I'll concede that there's no internal link and that there's no impact to warring. It takes out any solvency that the counterplan might have. And on the framework page, you should prefer magnitude impacts. You can only die once. And insofar as they conceded, the Moen evidence means that any increase in pain is bad and it outweighs any suffering that's happening now. And on the T page, counter-interpretation A in the resolution refers to one democracy lexicon that they use. Implies a specification, Carney. 11. Video cuts, but under requirements are given the positive food, the semantic word, but also specifically the principle of be and semantics is a floor, not a ceiling. Our interpretation is grounded in semantics, specifically more education debates, but there are tricks whose the core of the topics net by that's one is overloading. There's one app under their interpretation. 2. Prep picks me prep increase prep order inevitable. It's better for the app, especially the negative generics and con, but the app is 0. We're going to get picks under their interpretation. 3. We have prep codes and it's good, but forces the initially interested voting policy that for any states, otherwise each should be fallen into voting good or voting vouchers arbitrarily and policy and use reasonability principle race to the top and arbitrary applications of rules. And we get one error theory. It's key to check one and see abuse and the critique conditionalities of voting issues. One our flexibility with the darkest class that's key to like the value creepily developing makes that between the effort returns and the case turns and outweighs the critique, extinction, influx, endless violence, and everyone their alternative exploits that's billions and forecloses the possibility for conditions to improve. They not make you do not get to make decisions that kill billions of people that find value in the world. Any risk that their claims are false means you should vote F. And framework our interpretation of the advocates we should be saying whether the claim is a good idea. That means we should weigh the case. It's the best for creative competitive equity. The interpret unpredictable moves our offensive voice class and turns it into a monologue and summary critique. They seem to prove why the plan is false. And even if natives are an ontological position against the state, that doesn't mean conditions cannot operate within a sliding scale of civic effective policy generate value to later are not possible. Subtle colonialism is an international phenomenon. China is an equally settled colonial nation in Southeast Asia, but magnitudes worse. Millions of Muslims are in concentration camps, human rights toxic, etc. Being able to distinguish forms of violence is necessary for any theory. In pursuit of primacy is inevitable. The U.S. will never share power. That's our minimum evidence. Skip the card and the alternative. The permutation of both Native people should have the choice of surviving nuclear war and climate change, and the alternative is mere academic theories. And where do people go? How do people leak the mixed code? But these are all questions they need to answer before the great practice of the world and giving back. And private actor fiat is a voting issue. Swift manure strategy and kills that crown by allowing the negative reliance should be defeated. Survival in turns and find some different the always sole voting links to the critique that turns out critical education proves their models of superior action. They can vote after the turns. And on the counterplan, perm do both. We're also not going for the populism advantage. So, and we consider impact defense to warming. It doesn't matter if we can solve it. And the dissat. It doesn't matter if we can solve perm do. Yeah. And it also quickly also doesn't show the fact that it would have an international spillover. And the dissat compulsory voting flips the demographics that don't turn out now make it an increasing majority of the electorate and overwhelmingly support Democrats. That means Biden wins post-panic vote, and Biden and King now wins the one that are eligible to one, 10 eligibility members of Gen Z, older candidates, and also eligible voters, not my personal feedback, Clinton mobile, my personal feedback, Trump, generations of the generations of the views of the song, but the minority populations of the eligible to not believe in white in 2025, but Trump determining excellent even different racial groups, not only have typically well than the Democrats, so that kind of turnout rates, that are again protecting a generation that kept in mind. And mail-in voting doesn't favor one party. Goldenberg 730, allowing people to vote by mail does not give one party in terms of turnout or the election. All people about political stripes are concerned by the coronavirus support, letting everyone vote by mail. And normal means that the F includes alternatives to in-person voting and makes voting by mail safer. Which are 18 how compulsory voting works. They're playing ways to vote clean capacity ballots and embassies voting such as organized Technocratic Commission. On the set call, I didn't read the Kagan evidence, and I skipped around on the analytics. If you want me to go through them, I can.
I'm good. I'll start prep. Any independent reasons to direct the team except condo and private active fiat?
No.
Warrants for private active fiat?
Yeah, give me a second. Like from the NC or like the standards?
Like the private active fiat.
Sorry, repeat the question.
What's that? Like, why is it, like, just, what were the warrants for private active fiat?
It's use 1 AR strategy, kills AF ground, avoid links, turns, and solvency deficits of the alt, and avoids links to the critique, turns critical education, used an abstract theory, and issue about for deterrence.
The order is decay. I'll answer like the theory stuff on the top. It's decay. K case, actually. That's it.
Framing.
That'll be like on the K page.
Wait, give me one sec. Can you repeat the order?
K, and then on top, I'll do the private active fiat and then condo stuff. And then it'll be like, and then, yeah. K proper ending case. Is everyone ready? The condo shell was incoherent. You could not hear any of the standards. They were going way too fast, but either way counter until we get infinite condo prevents ideological extremism, defending against both sides, forces defense of the plan, not its ideology, best for nuance, decision making, info processing. Condo teaches us to think quickly and deal with the overwhelming massive info that's most reward that turns argument irresponsibly. Net like we need a variety of positions to test the app, especially on this topic with so many random country as their interp. This one means next should be stuck with this counterpoint, which means students never experiment, only read one counterpoint they're confident with. Anything else means that we can never read any other counterpoints. The skew, i.e. the internal links and clashes and inevitable says that T this has to be proved, even if you straight turns this has that T times to prove they can't solve their offense. Usually is good enough. They cause substance strata over marginally better intros. Q in our class intros clash on deep consistent set of issues. Reading less counterpoints means we read more disads, which turns skew because counterpoints are defenses, but disads are offensive. The private actor fiat stuff there. We're not private actor fiat. Ours is that we'll explain it more on the alt page. But ours is a movement against the government. It's not a private actor fiat, and we don't fiat anything. But either way, it doesn't skew right. You can still read the same offense and turns towards the alt day. Does not go background. Same thing, and it doesn't turn critical education because it allows us to garner more education about how specific people and specific entities can make a difference. For our interpretation is that app should be responsible for their research models, but prior questions to the implementation of the plan versus the federal liberalism. Just that their model debate focuses debate solely on a question of the plan's implementation, which distorts the questions that debates ask us to be about politics instead of the political, which ruins debate's revolutionary potential. Second is there's no offense. They still get their plan. I mean, no, we don't take away offense. They still get the plan. They just have to win their research model is desirable first, which solves the entirety of their intro. It says solves the entirety of their intro. There's sort of things about how it moves to offense of voice clash does not mean anything because they can do all these things, but you have to prove that their research model is good. First and the extinction stuff, it was all new, and they did not read any extinction things in the when they say that Moen proves extinction first because pain is because it's the greatest amount of pain, but no, Moen is a util author that prefers calc index between probability and magnitude. All he says that is pain good, not that extinction comes first. If there's only like a 0.1% chance of extinction happening, only we've made an argument about why our pain comes first. Because you can see it happening right now, and anything else ignores that pain. There's two arguments he dropped on this. First, it's like called the policy paralysis. First, so specifically for debate, it makes it impossible because there's always a 0.1% chance of extinction. Means you should prefer like settler suffering that's going on right now. Second is that it only prefers Western ideals of what's important, such as the Western big ideals of extinction, which also ignores sort of the settler suffering. Which these two are all reasons why the app cannot outweigh. And the K comes as a prior question. So this long with framework means that there's no way they can weigh the app against the case. We're sort of come up in the two area and make a big extinction push. Next is the link of roots of our link argument is the roots consent compulsory voting necessitates settler colonialism because it legitimizes the form of the nation state, but that must authorize law through the elimination of native populations. Electoralism, especially with voting, assumes that people consent to be governed because it adheres settler governance with the ability to compel people to participate in the political apparatus that requires colonial erasure because it asserts the sovereignty of the government over the indigenous people's right to refuse governments established on stolen land and via indigenous dispossession. The impact is recognition, which outweighs the case of politics of recognition, manages settler colonialism by articulating matters of genocide as issues of cultural difference and asserting the right of the government to coerce bodily activities for subjects in its own domain. That is how settler colonial violence is legitimized through the pathology of indigenous subjects. Material examples of coercive relation that their politics normalizes are treaties that rid indigenous populations of land and the conversion of indigenous populations at religious institutions for the purpose of assimilation. The perm is incoherent. Links are just as any link we've been proves that they should sever relevant portions to African opponent to solve, which is a voting issue for fairness and making negative engagement impossible. If they win the permutation, take the alternative and still vote neg. We have multiple linear discounts and the funding arguments that implicate the performative value of the fund. If we win that the representational strategy relies structures of colonial suffering that's sufficient to vote negatively. Certainly, that the permutation forces indigenous anarchism to be articulated as dissent instead of resurgence, which proves that all alternatives to the app are incommensurable. The plans to tacit endorsement of the nation-state form makes it impossible to endorse it in anarchic form, which means that permutation is parasitic on indigenous futures. All stuff they've missed on it all is not just decall. None of this applies, but vote negative for anarcho-indigenism. Voting negative is a practice of refusal that attempts to disrupt the liberal formation of the nation state by authorizing indigenous self-determination and creation of autonomous societies outside of the state governments. That alternative refuses the ability of the government to coerce action from dispossessed populations by moving beyond relations of contract. The alternative aligns itself with movements like I Don't Know More, which proves that first of all that we're not private action fiat, but that none of the responses apply because they are moving towards anti-capitalist, anti-hierarchical direct action aimed at subverting the state form entails to return to land-based cultural and community practices to encourage equitable resource distribution. There, another responses are actually responsive. They close to international phenomena. That doesn't matter. That means sort of prove that does not just through the fact that the research model is bad and that comes to the power question but also that we should prevent settler colonialism in the U.S. Obviously, the pro supremacy stuff does not make any sense. It doesn't matter if the U.S. will not ship her. That's a global issue. But this cycle thing is a domestic issue. The case page, we're going for the turn. China is not revisionist versus the defense. China is not revisionist. Sure, they might want power, but they'll never do anything riskier that might escalate war. Our study is the only one that takes into account empirical evidence that they've done before. All their evidence says that China is becoming more offensive. They've been doing this for years and sort of moves into the Middle East. They've also been doing it for years. Ours says that they're defensive realists and won't do anything too risky because they want to maintain allyship in order to sort of gain their power in the long run. And U.S. unipolarity is bad and violent. Overstretched in recent years. Attacks on bases stationed in other countries have drastically increased, which can be linked to anti-rising, anti-American sentiments. Attacks on the U.S. areas in which the U.S. has increased passion is direct to sort of more terrorist attacks and nuclearization in these places. These scenarios all cause the U.S. to get into conflicts in which have no direct correlation or benefit to the U.S. that turns their entire advantage. So the only response is about the China using rhetoric. It's not about China. This turn about why U.S. unipolarity is bad. So even if they're winning, that China causes U.S. To lose hedge, that doesn't matter because we say hedge is bad. They've basically just dropped this.
Okay, I have 2:30 left. Okay. It'll be the AF, like the democracy advantage proper, then the framework page, detail page, and then the critique.
Cool.
I'm ready.
Is everyone good?
Yep.
No, we're not trying to mean the 2020 election will be legitimate. That deconstruction, dissolution of the U.S. government, which leaves a vacuum for China to fill, which causes nuclear war. The AF outweighs, even if extinction should come first, it still causes nuclear war, which is incredibly violent and targets populations who are less, and counter-value attacks by states will target people like indigenous communities, which turns the impact of the critique and inflicts death on millions of people who did not wish it, which is still bad, even if extinction shouldn't come first. And on the line by line, this stuff about not revisionist China is just false. Our evidence is really good in this question and describes China exactly as revisionist because they are forward deploying recently and are looking to challenge U.S. powers, evident by the fact that they are taking any step in like U.S. in retrenchment of like U.S. democracy to weaken alliances and strengthen their own ties. And they did not explain enough about the hedge term. They also conceded that this is not the same type of hedge that our impact that we're going for is the nuclear war one, not the U.S. like retrenchment hedge. Good uniquely talks about how any steps by China, even if they're not revisionist, lead to nuclear war. Because like the U.S. government will not let anything happen. They're not looking for a peer competitor and the state's enemy on the framing page. Pleasure and pain are intrinsically valuable because I know pleasure is good for me. I have no reason to believe otherwise for you. But it's an obligation to perceive your ability to pursue pleasure. They have no indicts of Warren of Mullen, which even if extinction shouldn't come first, you should still put a very high probability of the AF, given they spent like a minute on the case page and have conceded all of our internal links leading up to the impact, which means it's a very high probability of the AF happening, which is sufficient enough to vote AF on the impact of nuclear war that has not been contested. Even if every time extinction shouldn't come first, in this instance, there's a very high probability, which takes out all of the reasons why it would be bad. And the critique proper of the AF should be able to weigh the case. Even if they weigh the case, they can still read the critique and weigh the impacts of the links. However, they need, if anything else would moot 6 minutes of 1AC offense and cause a 1AR restart, which is impossible to win. And even any risk of the AF happening and causing extinction and foreclosing millions of people to death, it's a reason to affirm. And they have conceded that the relationship between natives and the relationship described by the Kitay is not ontological, which means progress can happen, and things like the AF that increased representation in the government are net good because it allows for material conditions to change and hold, and you should only hold the AF to the impacts of colonialism. That because the fact that they've mishandled stuff about China being a really imperious country and Asia proves that like even if colonialism is bad, the huge impact, we should only hold it to the stuff specific to the United States and not all of colonial as a whole. And even and also they've considered that violence that happens in the alternative is bad insofar as it creates death and pain, which insofar they have no indicts directly on the Moen evidence is net bad, and risk of the AF outweighs. That even if it doesn't cause extinction, it causes huge amounts of death.